Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. And Angela, are you going to kick us off?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're here today to talk about hiking 101. I am Angela Crampton. I am the marketing and partnerships manager for SheJumps, and we're just really excited to have you all here today. SheJumps increases the participation of women and girls in outdoor activities to foster confidence, leadership, and connection to nature and community through free and low-cost outdoor education. So I'm really excited to introduce to you guys Georgina, who will be going over the Hiking 101 presentation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. We'll be answering them throughout, but also we will be taking and reading some of the more common ones at the end of the presentation if there's time. And then you can also use the chat to expand on anything that we're presenting today with your experiences. So I'm just going to hand it over and let Georgina take it from here.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. It's really a great pleasure to be here and also to be talking about something near and dear to my heart, which is spending time in the mountains, hiking, having fun, moving our bodies. So thank you all for joining. I just want to make sure the view that you guys can see me all fine. Right now, for example, on my screen, Angela, I just see the SheJumps logo. So I'm just checking in. If you guys want to pop in the chat, just let me know that you can see everything okay. Veronica says, I can see you, all good, cool. Where is everybody calling in from? I would love to know where you like to play and recreate and make this also as interactive as possible. So Park City, Calgary, awesome. Let's see here where people are joining. Portland, Maine, Portland, Oregon, all sorts, all over. Washington, Vancouver, Seattle. Awesome. Australia, welcome. Global audience. Very cool. London, Wisconsin, North Dakota, all over the West. Great. Well, thank you all again for joining. Today's intention is really, for anyone that's interested in getting into hiking, but not really sure where to start and begin. Special thanks to Angela with also helping craft this presentation and sharing a little bit. I'll go through the presentation, but I also want to just share my personal journey with hiking and how I got started, because we all have to start somewhere, and go from there. And as you have questions, please go ahead and pop them in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Great. Okay, so before we kick off, just a little, I want to personalize this. I'll go through all the slides, but just to give you context of how I got started hiking and enjoying the outdoors. I grew up in LA. I was not athletic growing up. When I started hiking, I could barely run a mile. And everything started with being able to walk a mile, then run a mile. The outdoors became a haven for me, and it's why I'm so passionate about sharing it with other people. To go from the beginning, which was like in my mid-20s, started with an indoor rock climbing class, which then got me curious about spending more time outside. Now I've climbed the highest peak in the world, Mount Everest. I'm on a journey to complete what's called the Explorer Grand Slam, which is climbing the highest peak on every continent and skiing to the last degree of the North and South Pole. I love skiing. I'm a backcountry skier. Everything kind of started with a simple run and then a series of simple hikes. And so, wherever you are in your journey, everything we share today, it's just giving you context to just start somewhere. And, the hiking piece, it could be as extreme as you want it to be. But it's also really beautiful to just start somewhere close to home. And so we'll dive into that today. So I'm going to go ahead and now try to share my screen yet again. Try to just share one tab. And let me know if there's any issues and you can't see it. Great. And you can see me too? No.
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Cool. So today, getting started, know before you go. As I kind of alluded to, you know, the mountains for me have become my greatest teachers and healers. And that's not necessarily how my journey started or what the intention was, but I think the more time you spend outside, it's a beautiful place to learn so many things about yourself. And it is completely transformative. And it, you know, as with SheJumps, we say we believe in the transformative play of the outdoors. And it is really life-changing. You learn so much about yourself when you're out there, new levels of confidence, resilience, and maybe, you know, you have to dig sometimes deep into places that you didn't even know existed within yourself. And then you also just have this beautiful sense of awe. This photo I took doing a project in the Slovenian mountains. I traversed all the mountain ranges in the country 2 summers ago. And I did it by myself. And this was one of the mornings on one of my last summits of the project. And it was wonderful. And I will share this about myself because maybe, you know, we all have our different fears. Before I started hiking and climbing, a big fear of mine was just spending time alone and spending time in nature. You know, that's been part of the healing, is that I've grown to love my time outside by myself. And, you know, if anybody would have told me that I'd go and spend over 2 months by myself climbing mountains in foreign countries, I might not have believed them, you know. But again, it's important to start somewhere. Like, I didn't start off completely by myself. So, you know, it's just something else to note. Safety first, you know, and everything we'll go through today is trying to equip you with the most basic knowledge. And I encourage you to, you know, dive in deeper and then also leverage the SheJumps community. We're here to support you on your journey. So if you have additional questions outside of this presentation, like, please feel free to reach out. I'll share my details too at the end. I'm happy to connect with you all. And so it's really just trying to prepare you to have fun out there, but be safe along the way. So how to get started, where to start. These are kind of the things we'll go through, is figuring out where you want to go and where you're able to go. And able to go sometimes has to do with your skill level too, right? So it's always about starting somewhere and starting somewhere that's safe for you. Planning, looking at the weather, looking at the terrain, all the, you know, potential things you might need to consider where you're planning to go. The gear, making sure that you're well equipped. 10 essentials, which ties into that. Leave no trace. So, you know, we get to spend time in these beautiful places, but it's super important to preserve them and take care of them so that they're there for future generations to come. And then, you know, just like the logistics of things to consider if you're doing more hikes that require permits or park passes or things like that. So this photo's in the Aspen area, lots of beautiful hikes there. And we'll get into the gear, you know, but I'm wearing yoga leggings and a yoga top and some trail running shoes, nothing super intense, you know, but it's a day hike. So we'll get into how to know when to plan accordingly and what to wear. So where can you go? I mentioned that I grew up in Los Angeles. So if I think of my first exposures to trails, it was probably in high school. I tried to join the cross country running team. Let's just say I had to drop out relatively quickly. I was not a natural runner. And running something that's been a journey for me. I've now run marathons, half marathons, but back then running was a real struggle. So my first times on the trail were trying to be on the cross country team, and it was in my local park, Griffith Park in Los Angeles, like really close to Hollywood. You wouldn't think of trails there, but so I encourage you, if you're wanting to get started hiking, even if you're in an urban environment, to take a look at what local parks might be available to you, local state and county parks. The Department of Natural Resource Lands, so BLM, that's That's a great resource too. National parks and forest. The National Park website has so much information if you're ever planning to visit a national park, potentially like first hikes and things that you could do there. And they're also pretty good about, you know, giving you guidance as to like what skill level you might need to be, how long it is, you know, any hazards along the way. I remember going to Teton National Park and Yellowstone, and a few years ago, and I actually took my dad there. It was his first time that he'd ever been. And, you know, there's something you really have to consider as bears, grizzly bears. And so before we would head out on a trail, I would always check in just with the park ranger just to make sure if like there had been any bear sightings or anything, even though we had our bear spray and all this kind of stuff, just to be extra safe and have the latest and greatest information. But some additional resources are there, and Angela and I were chatting before this presentation, and we'll be following up the presentation with a blog post, so with relative links and everything else, and this will be recorded as well, so you'll have access to this information in case you're trying to jot it all down. And so like knowing your skill level, you know, everything's a choice, right, of what we want to do. Like I said, I started off with like a really simple short hikes around LA. And for me, like the first big goal was to get to climb Mount Baldy in Los Angeles, which is just at 10,000 feet. And you can do it in a day. I didn't go in the winter. I went in the summer. So I didn't have snow to consider. But the first time it was a complete flop, and we'll get into the gear. Basically my shoes, I found out later, the shoes I had bought were definitely too small, and I lost 3 toenails in the process. Let's just say I didn't make it to the top of Mount Baldy that time. I had to go back for it. But I learned so much on that first try of like just gear failures, not enough water, you know, just different things. So it's important to know what you're getting yourself into and what you want to get yourself into. So, you know, ask yourself, how much of a challenge do I want? How long do I want to hike for? How steep do I want it to be? What type of terrain am I comfortable with? You know, do I want something that has a nice trail to follow and it's well marked? Or do I want something that's a bit more rugged? You know, these are all things to consider. And then your own physical shape, right? So I had to work my way up to that Mount Baldy hike, which was like a 6 or 8 hour hike, by just doing local hikes around home and starting to run and just really being comfortable being on my feet for so many hours. Because we might take that for granted, like, oh, well, it's not so hard. But if you're not used to walking, let's say 6 or 8 hours to go do something like that, that might be a lot on your body. And so it's just being kind and gentle and compassionate with yourself, and picking something that's good for you to start with. And then the skills for the needed adventure, right? So, you know, the more time you spend outside, the more you learn, and guaranteed you're going to learn so much along the way. But, you know, part of it is just preparing, doing things like you're just doing right now, taking this webinar, and just really assessing, like as you read the trail descriptions, whether you have the right skills to go. I really encourage you, if you've never gone on a hike or you've just done some hiking, to just do a day hike, local around your home if you can. National parks are also great if you're able to venture out to those, and then just like work your way up to different trails and terrain, and also get to see what you actually like and what you enjoy. So weather is super important to look at, and this really depends on, you know, where you're going. So if you're hiking close to home, you know, you could check your local weather report. That's going to give you some information. The minute you get out into the mountains, though, like you have to be considerate that they have their own sometimes microclimates and things like that. So there's some great resources here below, besides just National Weather Service and things like that. You can also look up local mountains to find out like at what elevation maybe they're expecting snow or rain or precipitation or things like that. Because the minute you start going above sea level, these are things that you have to consider. And sometimes at the parking lot, the weather's great, but actually there's maybe something in the forecast that over throughout the day, there might be weather coming in. I've split my time living in Colorado now, and there, even if you're not climbing a 14er, so a peak that's at 14,000 feet, if you're playing in any of those mountains, especially in the summer, it's like clockwork, like 1 or 2 o'clock. There's often thunderstorms, lightning storms. And so every time I go out, I double, triple check the weather just to make sure that I'm not going to get caught in something that might be, compromising for my well-being. So those are some things to consider. And so gear basics, in that first photo, I said, okay, I'm not wearing anything like super, technical, because that hike in particular was just a day hike. I had actually cycled to the trailhead, locked my bike, and then gone on a short hike. So it depends where you're going. You do not need the most expensive, latest and greatest gear. You just need things that are going to keep you safe and that you're going to be comfortable in. So definitely use what you have. Like if you're going on a day hike and you have workout gear, anything to exercise in, that's going to work great. Reach out to your friends if you can borrow things. Secondhand stores and things like that can also be a great resource if you don't want to go in and make a big investment, before you even decide whether hiking's for you and it's something you want to continue doing. Local gear swaps, like Facebook Marketplace are great. And then if you're wanting some more technical gear, for example, you can rent some gear. So REI does offer some rentals up in the Washington area, Whitaker Mountaineering. I've actually climbed with them through RMI, and my first big mountaineering trip was to Mount Rainier, and I rented a lot of my gear because I looked at that gear list, and at the time I was like, I can't afford all of this. So, and I also didn't know exactly what I needed. So I was leaning in on them for their gear list and their rentals. The bottom point is really great, and that's don't buy used equipment where your life depends on it. So as you advance, like ropes, helmets, harnesses, any type of protective gear, not a good idea to buy that used. So just disclaimer there. But here, in this photo, actually, I'm also wearing like synthetic leggings, a fleece jacket. We'll talk about layers, synthetic tank top underneath. I have my buff around my head because I tend to sweat a lot. So, and wool socks and some hiking shoes. And this was basically my uniform when I was traversing those mountains in Slovenia, because I needed things that were going to keep me dry, and then also things that I could quickly just add layers on as the weather changed throughout the day. It went from being super hot to like, needing a puffy jacket. So everything in between, and rain. Which this photo is a random rainstorm that came in, and it's like whipping out the waterproof jacket there. But as I said, the gear is going to really depend on the type of hike you want to take. So shoes are so important. I shared with you that my first hike, I lost 3 toenails because I did try them on at the store. And if you go to an REI, they even have little ramps that you can put on the boots, and then you can kind of almost walk downhill on those ramps, just to test like how your toes are actually like butting up against the front of the boot. So I did all of that, but I think I tried on the shoes with not the socks I planned to hike in. So of course I put on like great socks, wool socks, and then with the boot, and it just compromised my foot too much, and my feet swell sometimes. So the shoe was too small, and long story short, the 3 toenails were lost, and obviously it's fine. They came back, and REI was awesome, and they actually let me return those shoes that didn't work because they felt bad of what had happened, and I got a new pair. So other things to note: really avoid cotton. I've taken so many people out on their first hikes, and I always say avoid cotton, and it never fails. They show up with cotton, and then like we get cotton rain, and it's terrible because it will never dry. And so now you're just wet and soggy, and that's not good. You're going to get cold. Also with sweat, I mentioned I sweat a lot. So if you're somebody that sweats a lot, like your clothes are going to get wet. You want things that are going to be able to dry quickly. And that's why having layers in the small backpack is great too, because if anything gets too wet, you can just swap it out. And you're layering. So it's always great to have a good base layer, something that is quick drying. If you need to swap it out, you can. A mid layer, like a nice light fleece or something like that. And then it could be a synthetic puffy jacket. And then an outer layer, which you definitely want something that's protective of precipitation. So like something that's going to be water resistant or completely waterproof. And that the zippers, you're looking at these things so that the water can't actually seep in. It makes a big difference. So it's always great to just, even if you're going for a longer hike, just having those 3 layers, because you don't know how the weather will turn, especially if you're going into mountains, if you're going into any kind of altitude. Better safe than sorry. If you're going on a local 1 little hour hike by your home at a park, different story. A hat just to protect yourself from the sun. A backpack, again, it depends. Like right in this photo, I'm wearing a more technical pack because I was carrying a lot of gear. I was probably carrying about 50 pounds on this journey. But if you're going on a day hike, you can go with a simple backpack, maybe one you have at home. There is also great packs out there that have the hydration built in. The next is a water bottle. So you can kind of decide whether you want to bring a bottle of water, several. It's always great to have 2 liters of water on you, like no matter what. But if you're going obviously longer journeys, having more water, or if you're going out into the backcountry somehow, a way that you can filter water in case you run out or you need additional water. You don't want to get sick from, picking water from a stream or something like that. Having enough food, snacks, so keeping your energy level up. And then maps or GPS. So, we all love our devices, our electronic devices, and it's great. There's so many apps and maps for your phone, but I can't tell you how many times it's happened to me where like the phone, something happened and it failed. Either the battery died or things like that. So it's always nice to actually have a map with you. And if you're going for longer journeys, or if you think you might have rain or things like that, you can even get like protective plastic, not plastic, but protective like laminated things for a map as well, just to keep it somewhere safe where it's not going to get wet and damaged. And then the 10 essentials, which we'll talk about. And if there's any questions, I'm kind of running through all this quite fast because we started late. Please pop them in the chat and we are filtering them through, and we'll have a full half hour for Q&A at the end. And so layering, I started to talk about this a little bit. The reinforcing of no to cotton. And it's just, I don't know, it's a lot of people love cotton because it's comfortable. And so it's kind of the go-to, but I can't stress enough, try not to use it. This mid layer becomes really important too, because sometimes you don't want a big jacket on. You just want something that's protective enough. And that mid layer might be a really great combo with an outer hard shell, which would be something that's waterproof for when it gets really cold or windy. It's nice to have both. So wool is great, fleece is great, and there's a lot of other synthetic materials out there that are a nice in between those two. And for your outer layer, that could be a puffy jacket, but obviously if you have any chance of rain or any type of precipitation, snow, it's really good to have a hard shell. And the hard shell, the intention of it is that it actually fits over everything else, right? So when you buy it, consider the sizing, like what could I actually wear underneath it, so that it's functional when you need it most. And a hat, again, and some sun eye protection too, glasses or anything like that, so that and also the back of your neck. So the hat. So sometimes you see the hats that kind of have the adjustment. I use a bandana actually, but it is really important just to keep the back of your neck protected. That's why I also love buffs, because I'll put them on over, like a headband almost, but also protects my ears from getting burnt. Um, we'll talk a little bit about the 10 essentials, and I'll add some things to it. But I will just say the worst sunburn I ever got was on a glacier, and I really took for granted. I didn't see it didn't feel like a sunny day, so I didn't overlayer on the sunblock. And well, it doesn't matter if the sun isn't fully out, it's still there. And so it's really important to just keep yourself protected, because sunburns aren't fun. So 10 essentials. Definitely having something for navigation, which we've talked about. So whether it's a map, whether it's a GPS device or something loaded on your phone. I now always carry an extra like phone charger with me when I go on long journeys, because if I'm using the map, it just drains the battery. There's ways to download a lot of these maps so that you're offline. And that's really important to look at. So even if you lose reception, which will happen if you go out, sometimes in the mountains, depending where you are, you want to make sure that no matter what, you have access to the information. So there's a lot of great tools to just download everything onto your phone so that you have it offline. Sometimes I also just take pictures of the hard map and carry them on my phone so I can always reference them. But as I said, technology, as we experienced on this call, doesn't always work. So hard maps work great too. Headlamp kind of goes also with the extra batteries. You just don't ever, you might get caught out and it gets a little bit later than planned. So it's always good to have that. Sun protection, I started to talk about, and that's sunglasses, sun protective clothing. So that does exist actually. And even if it's a hot day, there's some really, there are some nice pieces of gear that are light, but have sleeves, so if your skin is sensitive, consider something like that. And sunscreen. And we're all different, right, as to what our bodies need. If I'm going to be out on trails multiple days in a row, and it's really sunny, I up my sunscreen to like 50 SPF, because I just tend to, I call myself like 50 shades of brown, happen really quick, and then it turns to just getting burnt. First aid. So just, you can get one of the first aid kits, which are really good, and definitely including things for foot care. The blisters are really important. And this kind of goes into testing your gear out too. So one rookie mistake I made with those hiking shoes is that I bought them and then I went on this really big Mount Baldy hike. And what I should have done is, purchased them and maybe done like a 30-minute trail somewhere near close to home, just to make sure that they were good and that the socks worked with them, because having blisters is super not fun, and it could also be really compromising. Definitely in my mountaineering journeys, I've had issues with blisters. So having something to take care of that, like moleskin, they now sell blister packs, putting that in your first aid. And insect repellent also is a good reminder. One key memory is in the Tetons. Like there was one trail that mosquitoes just got us the whole way, and I was so grateful that I had both like a spray and actually something put on. And my dad and I found ourselves actually loaning some to other hikers, because everyone had underestimated how many mosquitoes they would be on the trail. So a knife plus a repair kit, fire, so something to take care of yourself if you need to, matches, a lighter, if you need a stove if you're doing a longer trip, things like that. So shelter. So this is if you're doing something more extreme. So, can be like emergency bivvy, things like that. You can ask me about that if you plan to do something more in the backcountry and tents. But if you're planning a, multi-day trip, let's say, you're going to be carrying shelter with you. So it's just something to consider. And extra food, especially if you're hiking with other people, like, and if for yourself, like, bring exactly what you think you might need, but it's always good to have a little bit more. Also with the water, as I said, if there's any risk that you might run out of water, but you know that there's water sources on the trail, then you could either bring a filtration system or tablets or something to make sure that the water is safe for you to drink. And extra clothes. So it's always good to have a few extra layers. It's not going to add that much weight, and it's going to keep you safe and dry in case you either get wet from precipitation or just from your own perspiration. And so if we're spending all this wonderful time outside, it's really important that we take care of the spaces that we're recreating in. And so leave what you find, and as they say, take only photos and memories. We all are leaving an imprint everywhere we go. These places are leaving an imprint on us because they're wonderful and beautiful experiences, and they stay with us for a lifetime. But also we leave an imprint everywhere we go. And so it's really important to, be mindful of what we're bringing in and packing it back out. And so that just means, making sure that you're not creating trash and you're like, oh, I have nowhere to put it, even preparing that far ahead. So plan ahead and prepare, definitely. Travel and camp, on durable surfaces and also in designated areas. So a lot of trails, sometimes they're being rehabilitated and things like that. And they'll tell you not to go somewhere, because that area is being treated. And so it's just being really mindful that you're where you're supposed to be. Disposing of your waste properly, leaving what you find. It can be tempting to want to take things sometimes from nature. They're beautiful, but leaving everything as is. Minimizing your campfire impacts if you are camping, and respecting the wildlife. The wildlife thing is really interesting. I mean, depending where you're hiking, I mean, you could go for a simple hike in somewhere like Wyoming, and you still have to consider bears. They're around, and I can't tell you how many places I've been, and people see a wildlife, and it's somehow like they forget all the safety, anything out, it goes out the window, and they just want that photo, and they get so close, which is really not great for the animals. They get really scared. And if it's like a mom bear with her cubs, like super risky for you. And in other cases, it could be, more like farm animals. I've been hiking in places where there's sheeps and goats and other things, and it's like they don't need to be disturbed. They make great photos, but you can keep your distance. And just being considerate of other visitors. So, even while you're on the trail, sharing the trail and being respectful of people, letting people pass if need be. Everyone has their own pace and things like that. I can't tell you how many times I've been hiking, and sometimes people are like just right up against me, and it's like, whoa, I came out to nature to enjoy some peace. So I just usually pull off and let them go by. But the American Hiking Association has like really great additional resources on Leave No Trace, and Leave No Trace. Also, there's a website down here below, but we'll be sharing all this in the blog so you can reference it. So I mentioned, and when I started this presentation, that one of my biggest fears early on in life was I didn't like spending time alone. And then over the years, I've really grown to just treasure my time outside, and solitude is wonderful on the trail. I get some of my best ideas. I can reset in so many wonderful ways. And obviously from those early days of hiking, now I've done all these longer adventures and journeys, and a lot of them alone. And so it's really important just to leave a note, information of where you're going, emailing somebody your itinerary, leaving a handwritten note or something for your roommate, texting your plan to a buddy. letting somebody know. Sometimes I've done things that I know when I should be back at my car. And if I'm going by myself, I might message somebody, hey, if you haven't heard from me by this time, this is where I parked. And, just to be super safe. And also, God forbid, anything goes wrong, like people at least know where you were headed and how to try to come find you. So the things to remember, I guess, when letting people know where you're going is also like the vehicle you went in, when you left, the trail, the route, and when you plan to return. So as I said, I usually tell people like, hey, if you haven't heard from me past a certain time, this is where I'll be. And it just is peace of mind for everybody all around. So permits and passes. So depending on where you're going, you might need a pass. So I love going to national parks. You do need a pass. And then it's also worthwhile exploring like what kind of pass you need. If you want just a day pass, if you plan to be there multiple days, or if you know you're going to be visiting some of these parks or multiple parks throughout the year, then you might consider like an annual pass or something like that actually will help save instead of doing day passes at a time. So just something to look into. And also there's different times of year. Like, so right now it's National Park Week, and last Saturday, some of the parks, to my understanding, had a free entry. So there's always like interesting things to look for as in terms of how to explore, and then also how to make it more affordable and accessible. And so additional resources, the Gaia GPS hiking off-road maps, that's one of the apps, and we'll give you links to that. But just like Washington Trails Association has an app, and they have a lot of information on the local trails. Every single state has different associations that have loads of information on the local trails, as well as like local parks and things like that. So if you're not sure where you want to go, or maybe you think you might want to check something out, it's great to just go ahead and check their website and see what they have available, what maps or downloadable apps and things they have. The other thing is Facebook groups. So example here is the Washington Hikers and Climbers, but there's so many different Facebook groups, and leverage the SheJumps Facebook group as well. And there's different chapters, so different Facebook pages also for different regions. So if you want to get more local information or connect with more of a local community versus the broader SheJumps community, that's a great place to look as well. All trails, I love using all trails, actually, like no matter where in the world. It's really interesting to just, sometimes I'm in a location and I'll just search trails near me, and I'd end up discovering things I would have never found. And it's really fun to see also other people's reviews of the trails and what they think. And in Colorado, for example, like last summer, the snow stuck around quite a bit. And so there were trails I wanted to access, but I wasn't sure what was going on with snow levels, because some you couldn't actually reach the parking lot, let's say, even to access the trail because the road was still closed and things. And so I would have never known this information had I not checked out multiple apps and things, and people were leaving their own trip reports. So it's super helpful for planning. And we are entering hiking season, but depending where you live, also, and what's been going on with the snow levels, hikes that would be great for a day hike in prime summer maybe aren't ready yet because there's still snow on the trail. So it's just things to check out. And navigation. So I mentioned, at the beginning that it's really important to have the extra batteries on your phone and everything else, but in having these navigation tools. But also you could also look at, there's so many different GPS devices that you can use and utilize, but it's always great to have it ready and available. And then also test this out too. like learn how to use your device or whatever application you want to use for navigation somewhere that's like safe, easy, and accessible. Don't go and try to test it out when you're already doing like a very challenging hike, or you're like kind of out somewhere that you really don't know the terrain and you don't also know how to use the navigation system. So do the homework ahead of time and make sure that you know how to utilize it. And so just different map layers as well. And so this is, again, if like you're starting to get into more technical things, but it is a lot of these you can actually look at the snow depth, the snow forecast, and things like that. And again, this really just depends on where you're hiking and whether this is a consideration or something you need to take into account. Hydration is really, really important. And besides water, also think of things like putting in electrolytes in your water potentially. So sometimes if it's a really hot day, I'll carry 2 liters, and 1 liter is just regular water, and 1 liter is water with some electrolytes in them. And it's just really helpful for, you know, as you're going through your hike, just to keep yourself hydrated and energized. And that's something else too to like test at home before, if you end up trying to do adding anything to your water, just to make sure that you actually like the taste and the flavor, because you don't want to find out on a long hike that whatever you got you don't really enjoy. So but remember to keep drinking, especially like in the summer, as summer approaches, be really mindful of just staying hydrated. And water, you know, water bottles, obviously, please try to use reusable bottles. And you can also, like I said, at the backpack, if you want a backpack with a hydration system built in that has like a little pouch tube, if you don't want to use the water bottle. Now, if you're doing winter stuff, the hydration pack might not always be the best option because the tubes can freeze and things like that. But also water bottles can freeze too. So if you never experienced that, it's not fun to be out in the snow and moving your body and doing a lot of hard work, and then your water bottle freezes and you can't access your water. So in terms of food, as you're going through your journey, I love the first one is definitely pack food you love. You know, when you're doing day hikes and things like that, I mean, if it's not a long hike, a couple hours, an hour less, you know, you might not need a ton of food and snacks. But as you start to do longer hikes, the food becomes so important, and it's having something you enjoy is critical. And things that are, you know, giving you the right calories and energy too. So there's some suggestions there, but again, like play with that, explore with that of what, you know, you would be happy to eat at home and then also happy to eat on the trail. If you're out in cold environments, you know, having something that does give you some warmth. So you could even hike with a thermos and already have something warm prepared, you know, whether it's like a soup or a ramen or something like that. And then just things that are easy, like when you're hiking, it's really nice to just have even things that are accessible in your pocket. So whether it's trail mix or goos, I love goos. If you've ever, some people really don't like them. I love them. They have little goo blocks, things like that, that are just kind of keep you fueled. And we are nearly at our 30, the last 30 minutes of the presentation. So I'm just going to stop sharing this tab and go back to the Zoom and see if you guys have any questions. Let's see, I'm trying to scroll through them all, but I don't know if there's let's see. And okay, there's 17 new messages. So I guess Angela and Steph, I don't know if there's a way to unmute people or how we're gonna let you guys can go ahead and start typing in your questions.
Georgina, and what I'll do is I'll just read it. So this is from Vicky, and it says, what type of navigation do you recommend? And I imagine that there are several. Also, could you talk about any animal repellent for bears or other wildlife?
Sure. I'll start with the bear question. So bear spray, when, you know, I guess the area I've been in that I was most concerned with bears has been through Wyoming and Montana. And I got my bear spray at an REI. And so there's not like a lot of options. I think there was one, and it's a canister and has directions on it. It tells you have to be 10 feet away from bear to spray it. So I carried it basically. I was able to like attach it to the hip strap so that it was always accessible to me. I actually like created a little cord so that I could actually like move it up. So and for navigation, honestly, for me, it depends now where I am. I will just give a little word of caution. I meant to do this earlier with the Google Maps. Be super, super careful if you're dabbling into Google Maps and looking up trail information, because so many times like it's not updated and it's not correct, and it might lead you actually somewhere completely where there's nowhere to walk and go. It actually happened to me just a couple weeks ago where I was like, oh, I think the trail actually hadn't been maintained, and so I was trying to find another way, and I leaned in on Google Maps because I was just doing like a local few hour hike, and anyways, it set me on a big bushwhacking adventure, and got stuck in a lot of weeds and things. So you look at like Garmin devices, look at downloadable maps that you can utilize onto your phone. And Angela here also puts the Gaia GPS for 3 months for free, that you can try that for free. With All Trails, I know there's also a way, if you're a paid member, that you can download the maps and they'll work offline. So there's a lot of options. I really do like All Trails, I will say. And sometimes I spend a lot of time overseas. I resource with local people to also ask them what they use and what they like best, because sometimes they know different applications that I don't. Was there another part to that question, Steph? Because it was the bears, the navigation, and
it was bears and well, just any kind of wildlife.
okay.
And yeah, that one I think you answered pretty well. Yeah, and I was just answering this one about gators. So if you want to address that one, you can.
Sure. I will go back to the wildlife piece too. So I mentioned the bears, but also like areas like California or the desert, rattlesnakes are something to really consider. So that's why it's also when you're hiking, if you're going into area where you know that there's potential for snakes and things like that, to wear a boot that actually goes up to your ankles, just in case. And so that's something to take into consideration. And also, if you see like snakes on the trails and things like that, like don't approach them and don't get so close. If they're really not moving, usually they'll move, they'll get scared. But if they're not, is there a way to like encourage them to nudge away by making a noise, or maybe like I've encountered rattlesnakes a lot, and sometimes they're sunbathing and they really don't want to move, and you need to get through. So it's like, is there a way to like maybe throw a pebble or something, not at them, but like somewhere nearby to just kind of encourage them to move along? But be super careful with that. That's something else to consider. Gators. Again, I think it depends on the terrain. The gators, I mostly use gators for winter hiking, climbing, and snowshoeing. I don't use it so much for summer activities. Even if I'm in areas with like lots of dust and things like that, I'll tend to sometimes, like the pants I end up wearing almost have like the gaiters built in, meaning they have like a different like textured material, a little thicker down below your calf. But yeah, if you're going to also be in an area that's like a lot of brush, or you might, be going through not a set trail, then gators could be great to preserve, your legs also from being scratched up and things like that. Do you want to keep reading them off to me, Steph, or do you want me? I see some on here, but I want to.
There aren't any more questions that I see.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I think that we've done a really good job.
So we do have an attendee that raised their hand.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
It's okay. It's kind of a feature. So Maureen, I'm going to allow you to talk if you're ready to, or if you still have your question. So Maureen, you can unmute yourself and then ask your question. Maybe.
Okay, maybe I can unmute her. I can ask to unmute. Maureen, I'm asking you to unmute. See if that works.
Maybe she accidentally raised her hand. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I just curious for everyone that's on the call. So we still have 47 people on the call. What have your experiences been with hiking? Are you doing day hikes? Have you done multi-day hikes? Like you joined this call, so it's kind of interesting, like what you're hoping to learn and get out of it, making sure that we covered everything that you wanted to learn about. If there's anything that you're still curious about, like please, we have the time. I'm really happy to dive in. Or if you have any questions,
just raise your hand if you want to speak up so we can allow you to unmute.
Georgina, I was just going to add to that. I know that you're in the Pacific Northwest, the same as me, but oftentimes, unless I'm going somewhere where I know that there's going to be bears that actually are going to try to maybe snack on me, I don't usually carry bear spray with me. Just clicking my trekking poles and talking to my friends usually has them, they usually run away from me. So, and I've come across a lot of bears here, especially in the Olympic Mountains. So yeah, I just for cost wise, I just don't carry it because I know that oftentimes, just me talking usually has them run away. So anyway.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, what I was saying was I've only used the bear spray in Wyoming and Montana. And that's because there's grizzly bears and that they were like, the rangers told me they had been active on the trail and I was with my dad. So, and I didn't want to be in a compromising, we were doing backcountry. Like we were out 9-10 days.
That's exactly
and they were encouraging people to hike in groups of 4, actually. Like they really advised us that it was dangerous. That was just the 2 of us. So that's why I use the bear spray. But I grew up in California. I mean, there's black bears, you see them sometimes at the trailhead. And yeah, I totally agree. You could put music on, tap your poles, make noise. Rangers and a lot of the parks will actually tell you if you're going around corners and it's like known to be bears, to actually just say, "Hey, bear." And that sounds kind of crazy to do that, but it works.
Okay, we have I'm going to allow Veronica. She raised her hand to talk.
Sure.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So I also noticed in the chat that someone else mentioned that they are mostly doing day hikes, but hoping to do their first overnight this summer. And I just bought my first backpack, to haul gear. So I've also just been doing day hikes. The longest I just did last weekend was 15 miles. And so I want to know, like, what is the, advice that you have for going from day hikes to an overnight or backpacking trips?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's great you got 15 miles in. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, when you start to transition in, it's looking at the route too. So like just being mindful of, is sometimes you can maybe make your first day a little bit shorter and set up like a base camp. It depends, I guess, if you're doing a through hike or if you're gonna set up an overnight camp and maybe stay there a night or 2 and be able to do hikes from there, So kind of thinking about how you want to experience your first backpacking trip. If you want to be, if it's really going to be one night, and how many miles you're comfortable with carrying the pack for. If there's an opportunity, maybe there's somewhere really lovely to set up a little base camp and you can make your first trip, you set up a camp, and then you can do day hikes from there. That could be nice, and you're not always having to carry the gear. That's a nice way to start. And I think that I try to go way, way back, as to what I ended up doing. My first overnights were more camping to start, like just doing camping trips, like car camping, getting comfortable with that. And then as I was hiking more than going into an overnight trip. And my overnight trips actually to start were doing things like going up to climb Mount Whitney, but I camped at the trailhead the night before, and then I actually did an out and back and left all my stuff at the beginning part of the trail. So it was things like that just to get comfortable. And then because I went straight into mountaineering, I did a mountaineering course, and so that was I think where I really learned how to really get comfortable with my gear, and also knowing that I was with people that knew more than me. So I would say, if you're do you have anything planned? Do you know where you're gonna go for your first overnight, Veronica?
Not yet. Might just go back to the place I did the 15 mile and do that as find a spot to camp and then explore more there. So I think a one night to start is probably what I'm looking for. But no, I haven't figured that out. But since I've got some of the gear now, I'm excited and eager to do more.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, and that's great that you're choosing to go back to a place too that you're familiar with. I think that's a great idea. Anybody else?
We have another question that was sent to the panelists in the chat. In bear country, do you always put your food in bear bags?
Yeah, so bear box or bear canister, and it depends where you are. Like some places actually, those are like if you're going to certain national parks, they'll just tell you whether it's actually mandatory or not. I've camped a lot, not backpacking aside, I've camped a lot in Yosemite, for example, and like they're super strict about how to store your food while you're camping. And then also like while you're on the trail, let's say for most of those trails, like they don't require you to have a bear canister, but it's more for the overnight. If you're doing a multi-day backpacking trip out there, then yeah, I would definitely recommend some kind of bear canister. And then somebody said, how do you tie up your food and where to store the food if there is no requirement for a bear canister? So, definitely try not to have the food with you in your tent. Bring something to store it in. If there is a way to tie it up onto a tree that's not close to your tent per se. I also sometimes have leveraged, like if it's a rocky area and things like that, just putting it quite a fair distance away from my tent, I think is the main thing. And with the food, it's not just your food. So like if you're carrying any deodorant, any facial products, any hygiene products, like all these things have a scent. So it's important to just make sure that anything that has a scent is not in your tent with you. And in the blog, I'll do a little bit more research as to, specific how to tie it up and everything else so that it's in there, so you can reference it. We'll be sure to
add to Georgina, if that's okay.
Yeah.
SheJumps is offering a hiking to backpacking progression event on May 6th. So I shared the link a couple of times in the chat. But if you go to shejumps.org/events, you can also see that there. We are working with a guide company that does a ton of backpacking events in Alaska, and I'm sure they would be more than happy to answer all the bear and wildlife questions that are popping up.
Yeah. And I think it's just always important to just know. Somebody said to hang their medication as well because it smells tasty. Yeah, I mean, literally, it's anything that has a scent. We didn't include this actually in the presentation, but when you're going out hiking too, if you're on any medications that are critical to your well-being, just make sure you have those too, so that just if it's something that you take regularly that you need, it's something else to consider, like for a safety measure as well to have. So what else? Have any gear questions? Anybody curious about different gear or exploring with different gears? I saw one question there about the poles. I love trekking poles, especially for the downhill. It saves my knees a lot. And also on mixed terrain, like I can't tell you how many times the trekking poles have prevented a fall, or even on trails that have like a lot of like loose gravel and loose rocks. I'm notorious for, it's like kind of pebbles on a kitchen floor, marble kitchen floor or something, and so it saved me a lot of times from going down when I've like slipped on rocks and things like that to have my poles. And and I play with them. Sometimes I use two, sometimes I only use one actually, just depends on what I'm doing. But if you have any knee issues and things like that, I'd highly recommend investing in some poles or renting them. Let's see if there's any other one. Wet wipes or okay, there's other questions about high boots better versus low ankles for hiking. Okay. Again, I think this depends what you're doing. So Angela mentioned that there's going to be a whole other presentation on going from hiking to backpacking. And I encourage you all to join in on that if you're even remotely curious about going into backpacking, because like if you're starting out hiking, also being thoughtful of like the gear and things that you're starting to kind of accumulate so that it transitions all well. If you're carrying any weight on you, like for a overnight trip and things like that, the high boots are kind of just offer you more ankle support. And so that's important. And then also if you're maybe going anywhere that you might have to do like even a little bit of a stream crossing or things like that, the high boot, if they're waterproof, just keep your feet dry. Also, I mentioned if you're going on trails where there's potential snakes, like rattlesnakes and things like that, California loads. I mean, I hiked there so much, desert, Arizona, all these places. Then high boots, are a nice extra protection. My feet get super hot. And so if I'm not doing something super technical, actually, I love now hiking in trail runners. That's kind of what I've transitioned to over the years. But if I'm doing a proper hike and it's out in the mountains, I do like the high boots just for the ankle support. Saves from rolling ankles and things like that. So, Christina, I hope that answered your question. Any poll suggestions? I actually just got my cousin a pair of poles because he was really struggling with his knees. I mean, just adjustable poles for sure, so that you can adjust them based not only on your height, but also like depending on what you're doing. So when you're going uphill or downhill, you can adjust the lengths. And there's a lot of entry level poles. I think they work great for day hikes. REI has their own branded entry levels, and then basically every brand that makes poles have like the entry level. I've never had an issue with any of them. I mean, Angela and Steph, feel free to chime in if there's like a special pole or anything that you like particular to use. I know my first.
Oh, sorry. If you go on snow, there are options to like on some brands to add snow baskets to it. So it kind of widens the base of your pole so it doesn't completely plunge through the snow, which I find is helpful.
Yeah, so adjustable poles and ones that let you add the snow basket for sure. Because, sometimes, like I said, it just depends on what elevation you're at. Even like I said, in Colorado, you're doing like it's an easy day hike, but if you're going early season, there's going to be some snow. And so that's also, you could get the little tracks for your shoes. You don't need like full on crampons. You could get the little micro spikes that you can just add on to your hiking boots. That's something else to consider. And things like that. Also with the poles, when you're testing them at the store, the grip you know, the material and the grip, just something that you're comfortable with, that feels good, you know, to walk in for several hours. So, and, you know, and obviously like bad budget is a consideration. So I know when I first started out, honestly, like I really went like as basic as I could. I didn't have a big budget to invest. And, so everything was, and I really leaned in on whatever brand I was buying from, like either through their website, like using chat features or like customer support to ask questions, especially as I got into buying more technical gear. So if you're going to go into the next level, right, learning more into backpacking, or if you want to get into mountaineering, it's really helpful to sometimes just talk to the people from these brands and see what they would recommend for you. Like the backpack is really huge. You know, I'm not very tall. I'm 5'3.5", and I end up, because of some of these longer expeditions and things that I do, carry a lot of weight, up to 50, 60 pounds sometimes. And so the backpack is super important. And it has happened to me before where the backpack doesn't actually fit my frame. And so it's just the size of my frame, I say like my chest to my waist. And so it makes for a painful experience. And I've actually had to send packs back. So that's also like, if you're thinking about doing an overnight trip and things like that, like just even playing at home with loading your backpack up with like a bag of rice or like big bottles of water, and just seeing how the weight feels on your back and how it's distributed, just to make sure that the pack is kind of work for you before you find out on the trail.
Well, and Georgina, you probably know this just as much as the rest of us. Getting into hiking, you'll start out with something and then it continues to evolve, and pretty soon you have a whole closet full of different gear that that you've moved on from, and that kind of thing. So a really great resource is just finding other people that do this and borrow stuff from people.
Yeah.
Because you'll find that something may not have worked. Right now I have like 5 different backpacks, and it's just because I've bought them within my budget, and then gotten a little bit better one and things that fit and stuff, so I can outfit tons of my friends, and I'm sure you can too. But just figuring out what works and borrowing as many things as possible, because you'll find that what works for somebody may not work for you too.
Definitely. Yeah, and also like how you can, if you're doing other physical activities and things too, like how you can cross use all this, especially the clothing, right? How it translates to a bunch of different activities. So now a lot of my stuff I use for yoga, I use for hiking and running and things like that. I don't have such specific things. My specific things now transition more if I'm doing skiing or mountaineering or something like that. Otherwise, I try to leverage less is more. Let's see. So any other questions? Anybody that's on the call that's still left that hasn't taken that first hike yet, but really wants to? If you want to unmute or pop it in the chat. It sounds like most of you have all been on the trail in some capacity already, which is great. Yeah, as the weather's changing and things like that, I mean, it's just really great to. Oh, somebody said I've only gone on guided hikes. Okay, cool. And that's that's another thing too. If there's anybody, I hiked once in Italy with a donkey. That sounds like a story to tell me. I love Italy and I love hiking there. It's beautiful. Heather, looking forward to my first hike. Awesome. Yeah, if there's anybody that's listening that maybe don't want to go on a trail by yourself, definitely look at local groups that are getting out, meetups and things like that. I know it's hard right now with COVID, and there's restrictions, and every area is different. But I highly encourage looking, if you don't want to go by yourself, looking to see what local groups are available to you to potentially join. And then the guided hikes are an option as well if you don't want to go alone. Okay, Daniela, never alone, which I want to challenge myself to do this summer. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, like if you've never been out alone, like just do something close to home, or maybe a trail that you've done with friends before, because then it brings a little bit of level of comfort because you've already been there. I love being on the trail alone now. Like it's my meditation. It's part of my mental self-care. And we didn't dive into all of this. We went straight into how to get started hiking, but we didn't really talk about all the other additional benefits that come from being outside and hiking, for our own personal well-being. And just with everything that's happened over the last year, just the more time we get to spend in nature, how enriching it is for our soul. And so I hope all of you get out there and really enjoy the spring and the summer. The wildflowers are starting to pop out everywhere. Keep it fun. Again, like what was in the presentation, choose how much you want to challenge yourself. And maybe the challenge is to take that first hike alone. And it doesn't have to be some crazy hard hike. It could just be something beautiful to go look at wildflowers on the trail, take some photos, and come back. Yeah, so I mean, it's been so lovely to spend this time with all of you. Thank you for bearing with us with the technology at the beginning. I'm so sorry about that. But if you guys have any other questions, I'm just going to pop in the chat my Instagram, and you guys are welcome to ping me anytime if you have other questions. That's my handle. And we will be publishing a blog. So taking all of these questions into account and making sure that we answer your questions a bit more thoroughly. So if anything else comes to mind that you want us to include in the chat, let me know. Pacific Northwest Outdoor Women Group are on Facebook, and it's a great resource. Yeah. And that's the thing, like, this whole thing is like a discovery process. And as you get out there more too, and you start to connect with more people that are into the same things and stuff, it's really great. I mean, some of my best friends are people that I met on the trail, and it's a really beautiful community to grow. But don't be discouraged if you don't have the community yet, that will come. And you have SheJumps, so you have us to lean on as well. Yeah, so Angela just posted there that SheJumps also has regional Facebook groups. I mentioned that in the presentation for sure. So if you're looking for more localized information and people near you, that's a great place. And we'll just include more resources in the blog. So yeah, I wish you all a wonderful close to being evening for you all. If there's any other questions, going once, going twice. I think
you can probably stop recording.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. You stopped it. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.